hullabaloo over the idea of division by zero. When you watch a lot of these videos concerning the division by zero, you get all kinds of explanations, some of them very complicated, some of them fairly simple and straightforward, but they always come up with the same answer, that you cannot divide by zero. Some of them will try to subdivide into decimal fractions, down and down until you get a really, really small decimal fraction. And because that keeps going and going, they try to then jump to the conclusion that division by zero must equal infinity, which obviously is not the case. There are many other arguments this way and that, and this arguing over division by zero has been going on for hundreds of years. That's right, hundreds of years. Some of our ancient ancestors who first developed the current numeric system that we're now using, they were very brilliant men and women who worked out the mathematics that would go with that type of numbering system. Numbering systems like the Roman numerals were terribly bad at trying to do mathematics with it. With this, what was then a new numbering system of digits 1 through 9 was considered to be a revolutionary thing. And current archaeology has shown that these ancients, like the Antikythera mechanism, proves that they had extremely good mathematical systems, and they had a lot of knowledge that we did not give them credit for. Knowledge that got lost over the years, even. But there is something that needs to be understood. Well, first of all, before I get going too much, the thing is, I personally am not a mathematician, neither am I a historian. So these ideas and facts that I'm giving to you is basically my own ideas. But I believe that most of you will believe it and understand why. Because many, many thousands of you have been doing the same thing as I have. You have been solving the problem of division by zero in your own way and getting by with it just fine. The only thing is that the recognized problem of mathematicians saying that you cannot divide by zero. And because they demand that, then computer programmers are required to hardwire into every computer, regardless of how small or how big. Even this biggest supercomputer on the planet still has it hardwired that you cannot divide by zero. And in every case, it gives you an error message. Take, for example, a common calculator found on computers. If you take a number divided by zero, your answer is cannot divide by zero. And that's what's been hardwired into every computer system there is in the world. The thing is, it's not true. You not only can divide by zero, the ancients who first developed the numeric system knew how to divide by zero. Now you may ask, why is it that if they knew how then, how come we don't know how today? There is a reason, but it's not a mathematical reason. It is politics. In their day, wise men, or by whatever name they were called, in whatever country he may have chose, were the resident smart person, a resident computer, a resident person who invented things or made great paintings. They were individuals that kingdoms and countries would pay to and keep on staff all the time to help them with problems that would come up, to invent new machinery, usually for war, to do a whole variety of scientific work. And they were kept on staff. The trouble about back then is that if you displeased your employer, the person who you were living off of, you didn't necessarily just lose your job. In fact, you were lucky if you could manage to escape with your life. In many cases, when wise men displeased their benefactors, they wound up being drawn and quartered or beheaded or some other torturous form of death. And if their benefactor was very magnanimous, then they might just imprison them for a couple of years, but allow them to live, sort of, but in a more slave-like manner. It would be cheaper for them because they wouldn't have to pay them a wage. But the thing is politics back then made it to be very dangerous to have that kind of a job. As long as they could keep their benefactor pleased and happy with them, they would keep the job. Along comes secrets. A lot of the wise men of the day shared their knowledge about a variety of scientific characteristics. One of which, of course, was the numeric system that was being developed by them all. Each one had an input. Some symbols changed. A dot, for example, was used for a time as a placeholder. It didn't work very good because it was also being used as a sign of multiplication. It's still used today, for that matter, not just the X sign for multiplication. Just like other old signs, division, which was a dot above and below a horizontal line. That was a symbol for division. Nowadays, most of the time, it's just a slash. The thing is, these symbols have changed, but they were all considered mathematical symbols. The mathematicians of the day had to keep certain secrets, and the reason for this was to protect their jobs, their livelihoods, their very life. And that was that they had to have certain things that they all knew about, but had to be kept completely secret. So they had to agree to disagree on certain things, so that each one could say to their particular benefactor, well, I know how to do this particular operation, and they don't. That makes me smarter than them. So, and one of the things that they chose to have that way was division by zero. It really wasn't that complicated. It's a simple process, which I'll show you later. The thing is they had to make this secret in order to protect themselves. Of course, kingdoms along the way knew that their wise men were getting old, and they were anxious to train a new upcoming bunch of people to find new wise men to take their place as they died off. So they ended up being teachers, teaching young people, and the smartest ones would get the jobs. A problem there, though. Not all smart young people coming up, learning the trade, so to speak, were wise enough to know when to keep their mouth shut. So unless the tutor teaching them mathematics felt that they could truly trust them to keep their mouth shut, then they did not tell them the secret of division by zero. They just simply flat out said, you can't do it. It's impossible. You cannot divide by zero. And so the younger generations came up, and very slowly but surely over time, the secrets of how to divide by zero disappeared. And unfortunately, because there were so many wise men who were trained that you cannot divide by zero, it became a major argument in mathematics down through the centuries. And now in our day and age, with computers being hardwired that way, division by zero, when it comes up, may be fairly harmless. You get an error message. And other times it can be very damaging, even to the point of costing someone their life. And I believe it is about time that our scientists, our computer engineers, and mathematicians got their heads together and straightened out this mess about division by zero. As an example of the problems that it's causing in our computers, here's a spreadsheet on which I keep track of the expenses that I spend on various things. This here is a truck that for the last year and a half I haven't been able to drive because it just costs too much for gasoline. Out of all the repairs and stuff I've done on it, it has now become too expensive to use. But it gives a good example. You'll notice that for each year I show how many days that I use the vehicle. But then I have a string of ones going into years that have not yet happened, like 23 and 24. The same thing down here for my travel trailer, showing how much days it has been used during that year. This number is added up to a sum, and that number is used in these calculations over here to the left, as you can see. And so these number ones, which are there solely because there are other pages that are made that show the costs and expenses, and it requires that these numbers be there. Why? Because if I put a 0 in there, it ends up giving an error message. Watch, for example, here, if I put in a 0 here on this one for this year 2022. Now, this comes a little bit more correct, which gives me more correct results over here and on other sheets as well. But when I come to that page, it gives me an error message right here. That is because I put in a 0. Cannot divide by 0. But yet I know what the proper answer is supposed to be. But in order to trick the program into giving me the correct answer, I had to go back and put a 1 in instead of a 0, and now it gives me the correct answer. As a result, this problem here causes me to have to give incorrect data to some of the figures that I need in order to calculate the expenses of whether something's worth to keep using or to sell or to just get rid of because it's no good anymore. Decisions like that are easier to make when these kind of records are kept. Now, that demonstration simply showed a very minor problem of what can be caused by the inability of our computers to divide by 0. But think how serious it is if an error comes up and you're trying to fly an airplane or run a submarine or go into space or just drive your car down the street and the computer system in there comes up with an error, which can be very serious for you. Now to show how division by 0 is accomplished. But in order to get there, I have to build a foundation again. That is, I have to show the logic behind how we get to that. First, we'll start with multiplication. Multiplication by 0 is shown, but let's say you have a string of numbers and you can add them up. You have 4, of course, but that is the same as multiplication. It's the same as having 1 times 4 equals 4. And that is done with multiplication. Now watch what happens when you decrease that number down to 0. Then that means that there's only 2 left there. And this number, of course, reflects the 2. If that number is dropped to 1, then this number becomes a 1, and that means that there's only one digit left, and that becomes the 1. Now watch what happens when multiplication does a 0. 1 times 0, guess what, equals 0. Now, why is that? Because a 0 is not a digit. Zeros are associated with the numbering system so much over the years, over the centuries, that instead of numbering 1 through 9 for our digits, we number 0 through 9. 0 has become identified as a digit. The thing is, anciently, 0 was nothing more than a placeholder. If you had a number up there and but you didn't have a place, you had to hold a place, they sometimes would put a dot, sometimes they would put other marks, but they eventually settled on using a 0 just to hold the place. It meant there was no value in that position on the line, and therefore you could read the number correctly and get the correct value. But the 0 was not intended to be a digit. It was intended to be a mathematical expression, the same as multiplication, division, subtraction, addition. It is a mathematical symbol that has power to do things mathematically. And what happens here with this 0, its mathematical power has the power to say that there's no more list. And if there's no more list, then there's nothing but a 0 there. And therefore, any number that you may choose to use, if it's multiplied by 0, it becomes 0. Now, watch what happens when we divide. And remember that division is opposite of multiplication. In this case, it equals 1. Then, what happens if we are dividing by 0? What that means that any number divided by 0 is going to be that number. And why? Because with multiplication, any number times 0 always equals 0. And that's because that 0 mathematically had the power to say there's nothing left here. So because there's nothing left here, it equals 0. With division, the 0, when you have a number that is divided by 0, it equals the number. And the reason for this is that this mathematical symbol of 0 has the power to erase the function. It erases the function and leaves you with just the number. So anytime a division by 0 takes place, the number that's being divided is not changed, and you're left with that number. Now for a practical demonstration. Let's say this is an apple. I don't happen to have one handy at the moment. And the function you want to perform on it is to eat the apple. Well, if there's me and my wife around, I can take that apple and divide it in half, and we each get a half. That's division by 2.
If I take the apple though and there's nobody else around and I'm hungry, I can go ahead and eat the apple myself. That's division by 1. However, if I decide to take this apple and not eat it right now, but put it away for a later time, what I've just done is divided by 0. The apple still exists, and what has happened is 0 has canceled the function of division.
Now remember, what I'm saying here is that in multiplying any number by 0 will equal 0, as has been established in our mathematics. But what has been argued over the years is that any number divided by 0 still equals that same number.